Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We're actually on location today. We're at the French Commons here at the Spirit of Vincennes Rendezvous as we're going to continue reading today from A Bucket Full of Courage. And you'll recall we finished up chapter 1 right after Betsy's papa came home from his trip to the Kentucky country, and they're talking about plans to go there themselves. So let me put on my spectacles, which are fogged up this morning. I don't know if that helped at all. It is muggy out here today. But we're going to read from chapter 2, The Wilderness Trail. My feet hurt, Papa, whined William. Will we be there soon? William's older brother James rolled his eyes in disgust. How is it that we all walk the same amount every day, but you are the only one who complains about sore feet? Maybe Papa needs to give you a sore bottom and make you forget about those feet. Well, maybe you just need to mind your own business, William, blurted James. I was talking to Papa, not to you. Betsy covered her mouth and choked back a giggle. What James said was truthful. Little William griped and complained almost all the time. Everyone in the family was growing weary of the fussy little boy's ceaseless whining. Still, James had absolutely no business answering for his father. He certainly spoke out of place when he mentioned the possibility of a spanking. Papa surely would not be pleased. Betsy held her breath as she awaited her father's response. Well, Robert Johnson did not delay. He calmly but quickly scolded his eldest son. James, I will not tolerate that kind of talk between siblings in this family. William was speaking to me, not to you. I do not need you to discipline him for me. I will decide when and if it is an appropriate time to give anyone a sore bottom. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Papa, mumbled James in shame. You do not sound convinced. James spoke again, this time a little more loudly and enthusiastically. Yes, Papa, I'm sorry for intruding. It will not happen again. Good. Robert stared at his son. James lifted his gaze from the leaf-covered forest floor and made eye contact with his father. His papa's stern look transformed into a grin, and he gave a brief wink. James concealed his own smile as best he could and turned his attention back to the trail. The wise father turned his attention to the other son. William, I've told you twice already today. We should arrive at Fort Minier tomorrow afternoon, and we will enjoy a few days of rest there. Do not ask me again. The fort does not get any closer simply because you wish it. The only way to get there is by walking. Meanwhile, we still have a couple more hours of walking to do before we make camp for the night. I suggest that you focus your attention on the trail and stop fretting over your feet. Yes, Papa, responded the 5-year-old. I will try. No, son, you will not just try. Trying is not enough. You must do as I say. You are walking to Fort Minier just like the rest of us. You can either keep up with the family or I will leave you here on the side of the trail for the engines. William's eyes grew wide with fear. What do you think, Mr. Suggett? Do you think the Delaware Indians would keep William and raise him up as a local Indian, or would they trade him away to the Shawnee? Grandpa Suggett responded, Oh, I don't rightly know, Robert. I imagine sooner or later they would get tired of all his whining and complaining and just roast him for supper. Betsy blurted out, Is that true, Pappy? Would they really roast him and eat him? Well, they do like venison a lot more, but a little fellow like William would be nice and tender to them. They would serve him up right there with a pot of potatoes and carrots. Well, little William gasped. Sorry, little William gasped. He instantly picked up his pace. Suddenly, his feet did not appear to be sore at all. It seemed as if the little fellow had been miraculously healed. Well, Betsy cast a glance at her father and saw a broad, mischievous smile across his face. Her mother was grinning from ear to ear as well. Her grandfather invaded the silence of the woods with his deep, contagious laugh. Even her grandmother, who was ordinarily very stern and solemn, could not help but laugh out loud at the little boy. Soon everyone in the family, including little William, was caught up in a chorus of joyous laughter. Betsy was so very happy that her grandparents were accompanying the Johnsons on their trek to Kentucky. She had grown particularly close to her grandfather, James Suggett. He was an old Methodist preacher. Everyone who knew him called him Parson Suggett. Betsy and the other grandchildren just called him Pappy. His wife was Jemima Suggett. The Johnson children called her Mammy. The laughter subsided relatively quickly. Betsy's father and grandfather had little time for teasing, conversation, or laughter. They had to keep a sharp eye on the surrounding woods. Both men carried their long rifles across their chest and at the ready. Attacks by Indians were relatively rare in the area where they were traveling, but they still occurred on occasion. There were also times when there were bushwhackers and thieves that tried to rob the pioneer families on the mountain trails. Robert Johnson was determined to keep his family safe from harm. Betsy looked up at the high canopy of the forest and smiled. It was a typical, beautiful day in the mountains of northwest Virginia. A soft early autumn breeze rustled the high treetops overhead. A few of the drier leaves broke loose from their limbs and fluttered to the dark, musty forest floor. Throughout the canopy of trees, a great chorus of birds squawked and chirped. Annoying woodpeckers drilled noisily into the hardwood trees. Squirrels jumped recklessly from limb to limb. Betsy absolutely adored traveling through the lively woods. The energetic little girl was an explorer at heart. She loved animals and wildlife. She wanted to see and encounter every interesting creature that she possibly could during their journey west. She wondered what strange beasts awaited her at the Johnson family's new Kentucky home. The pioneers had been traveling on the narrow mountain trail through northwest Virginia for just over a week. It had been a little over 3 weeks since they left their home in Orange County, Virginia. During the first 2 weeks, they traveled along the lowland road that ran through the beautiful Shenandoah Valley. They were steadily making their way northward toward Fort Minier, a remote outpost on the Cheat River. The little frontier fort would be the launching place for their journey downriver to the falls of the Ohio River. Betsy picked up the pace a bit so that she could walk beside her father. She enjoyed her own private times with her papa each day. He always took time to share the occasional story. He also answered all of her questions. Robert Johnson always seemed to have plenty of time to talk to his little girl, even though he had many other responsibilities. He cradled his Pennsylvania long rifle in his left arm and kept a careful eye on the forest up ahead. He took his duties as leader of their family very seriously. Betsy slipped her hand inside the crook of his arm and gave him a quick hug. What will Fort Minier be like, Papa? Well, I'm not really sure, Pumpkin. I've never been there before, but it's a fort. People have recently started going there to begin their river journey to Kentucky. They rest there and gather supplies and construct rafts and small boats. The fort will have fresh water and perhaps a tavern, and who knows, you may even go to sleep in an actual bed for a few nights. He smiled warmly at the little girl. I think it will be a lot like the place that we build once we reach Kentucky. Betsy nodded thoughtfully. Will there be other people there? Most likely, but travelers do not remain at Fort Minier for very long. Most folk are anxious to get onto the waters of the Cheat River and then float downstream toward the Monongahela River. The Monongahela winds its way through the hills to Fort Pitt. That is where we will take a larger boat down the big Ohio River. I am ready to reach our new home, but I like traveling. She spun in a circle and waved her arms toward the sky. Isn't the forest wonderful? Her father chuckled. I only wish that William enjoyed the journey as much as you do. Oh, William will be fine, Papa. Mama says it's just his nature to complain. Well, I reckon your mama is right, as usual. He patted her on the head. I'm very proud of you, Betsy. I've been watching you around camp in the evenings. You're a fine helper for your mama. The other children look up to you. Betsy's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She always blushed when someone paid her a compliment. She responded shyly, I really like to help Mama and Mammy around the camp. You help her a lot, and Sally too. You're a good little girl, Betsy. I think you will make a young Kentucky fellow a fine wife in a few years. Betsy almost shrieked. Ew, Papa, never. I'm never going to leave you and Mama. I don't want to get married, ever. Robert Johnson chuckled and pulled her bonnet down teasingly to cover her eyes. Well, we'll see about that. But you have no need to worry, my sweet girl. I'm going to be the only man in your life for quite some time. He paused. Well, except for William and James, of course. Betsy rolled her eyes. She was just about to respond when the sharp crack of a rifle echoed through the forest. It sounded like it came from the trail up ahead. What was that, Papa? Betsy asked. She was frightened. Is it Indians? Will they attack us? He smiled. No, Betsy. That was the sound of supper. I sent Cyrus on ahead to scout out a place for camp. I'm quite sure he just got us some fresh venison for the pot. Well, how do you know? Because I told him not to shoot unless he could get a deer. A raccoon or a possum would not do much to feed all the hungry Johnsons and Suggets. He turned around and shouted encouragement to the family. Keep moving, folks. There's fresh meat up ahead. We have us a deer on the ground. A loud cheer erupted amongst the weary travelers. Well, the group reached the campsite just over an hour later. They found Cyrus kneeling beside the trail. He had already skinned the deer and was just beginning to butcher the meat. A fast-moving stream with clear, cold water flowed nearby. Cyrus, just cut out the loins and clean the meat off of the front legs, Mr. Johnson instructed him. We can also boil the heart and rib and bones for our soup stock. The ladies will cook up those tender pieces into a fine stew. That will be plenty to feed us tonight. We can take those big 2 hind leg quarters on to Fort Minier tomorrow. We might be able to trade them for some other supplies that we need. Cyrus nodded. Yes, sir, Mr. Johnson. I was thinking the exact same thing. The family wasted no time in setting up the camp. The men built small lean-to shelters using branches and limbs from spruce and pine trees. The ladies helped Cyrus cut and dice the meat for cooking. William started a campfire while James picked up firewood from the forest floor. Betsy carried large buckets and smaller piggins to the creek and hauled water back to their campsite. Betsy's mother and grandmother took a large cooking pot off of their lone pack mule and began to prepare their hearty venison stew. They used the last of their potatoes in the stew, along with a half a sack of dried corn and an ample supply of wild onions. Cyrus told Mammy Suggett about an area nearby that was covered with edible mushrooms. She was experienced in collecting safe edibles from the forest. She picked and gathered the mushrooms in a basket and added those to the stew as well. An hour later, the family enjoyed bowls full of the thick, delicious concoction. It was quite a feast. Betsy was so hungry that she ate 3 bowls full. The warm stew that filled her stomach made her feel very sleepy. I'm ready for bed, Mama, she proclaimed. I think we all are, dear, Jemima Johnson replied. She turned to her sons. Boys, go with your sister and wash your bowls, hands, and faces in the creek. Once we tidy up the camp a bit, we are all bedding down for the night. Yes, Mama, they replied. James and William both yawned. What about the fiddle playing and dancing? Asked William through his yawn. Cyrus was quite an experienced fiddle player and singer. The old slave man entertained the family on most nights with his lively songs. The children loved to clap and dance to his amazing tunes. Silly lad, scolded his mother. Just look at you. You can barely keep your eyes open. No one is in the mood for music or dancing tonight. We are just one day out of Fort Minier. It will most likely be a long and tiresome day. The ground is getting steeper and our walking is becoming more difficult. We need to get plenty of rest for tomorrow. Now get going and do as I told you. Wash up and get in the shelter. The children scampered toward the creek to wash their dishes. The women and Cyrus cleaned up all their cooking equipment. Grandpa Suggett took care of the mule, making sure that the animals fed and watered. In less than a half hour later, the travelers were snug inside their shelters and covered warmly beneath their wool blankets. Robert Johnson hid in the shadows in the forest and kept careful watch over the camp for the first hour. He, too, soon became overwhelmed with the desire to sleep. He joined his wife in their shelter and prayed that there were no Indians or thieves lurking nearby. Betsy had a little bit of trouble falling asleep that night. She was too excited about the journey that awaited her. She wondered what Fort Minier would be like. She wondered what it would be like to float down a river on a boat. She had never been on a boat before. Her mind raced with all of her thoughts and ideas and questions. And Betsy was still awake when she heard her father crawl into the shelter and go to bed. As she lay there and stared at the roof of her shelter, her imagination ran wild with visions of strange animals of the forest, huge bears, fat buffalo, and enormous elk. Even as the world around her became shrouded in darkness and slumber, Betsy could still hear the symphony of life in the forest. The water bubbled in the nearby stream. Possums shook the limbs of the trees. Whippoorwills sang their shrill, haunting songs. Far in the distance, there was a haunting call of a lonely owl. Betsy pretended that the owl was actually an Indian who was signaling to his friends. She grinned in the darkness at the thought. I'm just being silly. I'll probably never even really see an actual Indian. Betsy finally closed her mind and drifted off into a deep and restful sleep. Well, that's the end of chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed it. I know we got some sound effects in the background where there's some vehicles moving about the camp, and the train comes through on occasion. And I believe I hear a little pitter patter of rain on the roof of the tent. But I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure and give us a like and subscribe to the channel. And we'll pick up soon with chapter 3. Thank you very much.